Malcolm Hayes had faced corporate takeovers, market crashes, and hostile investors with unshakable calm. But nothing, not even the darkest moment in his 25-year rise to power, prepared him for the sight of his 6-year-old daughter, barefoot on the cold kitchen tiles, mopping the floor in silence, her little arms streaked with angry red marks that wrapped around her skin like cruel reminders of something unspeakable. She didn't see him at first. Her body was trembling. Her small fingers gripped the wooden mop handle like it anchored her to something. Her t-shirt was stained, stretched tight across her torso, and her jeans were ripped at both knees. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears, her lips slightly swollen, and when she finally turned toward the sound of her father's stunned voice, the look in her eyes, terror mixed with relief, cut through him deeper than any betrayal he had ever known. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love hearing from you. And if this story already has your heart racing, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe so you never miss a tale that matters. Now, let me take you back, just 20 minutes before this moment, when a successful black millionaire thought he was simply surprising his daughter with a scoop of her favorite vanilla ice cream, not stumbling into the worst moment of her young life. Malcolm had never come home early, not since Celeste passed. He had buried himself in Hayes Capital Group and its endless orbit of responsibilities. Private equity deals, mergers, charitable boards, tech summits. He had made sure Nia, his only daughter, had the best of everything, a therapist who specialized in grief, a retired chef who made meals shaped like animals, private tutors from Stanford, and a highly recommended live-in nanny named Tracy Whitmore. Tracy had come with glowing reviews and a personal referral from Simone, Malcolm's fiancée, elegant, composed, and practical. Tracy had raised 3 boys of her own and claimed she understood structure. That had sounded good at the time. Celeste had always believed in kindness and routine. But Malcolm, still navigating fatherhood alone, had leaned into delegation. The corner store on Franklin and 23rd had just restocked the rainbow sprinkles when Malcolm decided to make an unannounced visit. He had planned it in his head. He would walk through the door, call out Nia, and she'd come bouncing down the stairs, curly hair in motion, laughter in her voice, wrapping her arms around his waist like she used to. Instead, when he opened the grand double doors of their Pacific Heights mansion, he was greeted with cold, echoing silence. No cartoons, no music, no humming from the kitchen. He stepped inside slowly, leather loafers quiet against the marble. Something felt off. The stillness was too complete, like the house had exhaled and was waiting. He called out her name, once, twice, but heard nothing in return. Then, a sound, faint, uneven, cut through the silence like a whisper of distress. Crying, not loud sobs, not wailing, just something broken and quiet. He moved toward the kitchen. That's when he saw her, and everything in his body went cold. His daughter, his child, the one he had sworn to protect, was standing on a step stool, trying to clean a floor she never should have touched, tears drying on her cheeks, her tiny arms bruised and scratched in ways no child should be. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Daddy," she gasped, and the mop clattered to the floor. She tried to hide her injuries, quickly pressing one arm behind her back, but Malcolm was already kneeling in front of her, his hands shaking as he gently pulled her forward. "Nia," he said, his voice low and tight. "What happened? Baby, what is this?" She didn't speak at first. Her lip trembled. She looked down at the floor. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I was too slow mopping." Malcolm's chest tightened. "Who told you that?" She hesitated, then answered, "Miss Tracy." His mind reeled. Tracy Whitmore. The woman who had practically moved in. The one who said Nia needed boundaries. The woman Simone had vouched for. His vision blurred with rage, but his voice stayed calm. "She did this to you?" Nia nodded once. "She says I mess everything up, that I have to work or she'll send me away. Like Mommy." Malcolm felt something inside him rupture. His little girl believed she had to earn her right to stay in her own home. He picked her up instantly, her thin arms wrapping around his neck, her body clinging to him like a lifeline. "No one is sending you anywhere," he said, voice cracking. "Not now, not ever." Her breath hitched. "Don't tell her I told." But it was too late. The moment was already burning into him. And just then, footsteps echoed down the hall, deliberate, unhurried. He turned toward the archway. Tracy stood there holding a laundry basket, face unreadable, lips pursed in feigned surprise. "Oh," she said, almost cheerfully. "You're home early." Tracy Whitmore's voice drifted casually into the charged air, as if nothing were wrong, as if she were merely commenting on the weather. But the moment Malcolm heard her say those words, "You're home early," with a polite little smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, something in him shifted. He stood slowly, still holding Nia tight against his chest, his hand cradling the back of her head. His entire body tensed as if bracing for a second impact. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at Tracy. And in that stillness, something passed between them. She blinked once. Her eyes flicked from his face to Nia's, then back again. He saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, the weighing of possibilities, the silent testing of lies she might tell, the risk of truth. But Malcolm didn't give her a chance to say anything more. His voice came out low, even. Every syllable weighted with deliberate restraint. "What did you do to my daughter?" There was no warmth in his tone, no mask of civility, only the kind of cold fury that comes when a man realizes someone has harmed his child under his own roof. Tracy's expression didn't change much. She set the laundry basket down gently, smoothed the front of her blouse, and said with perfect composure, "Excuse me?" Malcolm took a single step forward, Nia's arms still wrapped around his neck. "The bruises, the scratches, the crying. You made her mop the floor like she's your maid. She's 6 years old." Tracy let out a sigh, not nervous or ashamed, but irritated, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "children need structure. They need discipline. Nia has been acting out. She broke 2 glasses this morning. She lied about brushing her teeth. She deliberately spilled juice on the carpet last week. You weren't here to see it." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "I don't care if she broke every glass in this house. You don't lay a hand on her." At that, Tracy's mask slipped for a moment. Her shoulders stiffened. Her mouth tightened. "I raised 3 boys," she snapped. "I know what it takes to correct behavior. You asked me to keep her in line while you were off closing deals and shaking hands with investors. I did what needed to be done." Nia flinched in Malcolm's arms at the sound of her voice rising. He felt it. Every muscle in her tiny frame tensed. That was all he needed. "She's not a project," he said, his voice quieter now, but edged in steel. "She's my daughter. You don't speak to her that way. You don't touch her. You don't decide what she deserves or doesn't deserve." Tracy crossed her arms, defiant now, her voice laced with contempt. "Then maybe," she said, "you should have been around more often instead of leaving her with people like me." The words hit like a slap. Malcolm's spine stiffened. For a breath. There was silence in the kitchen so deep he could hear the hum of the refrigerator. The insult wasn't just personal. It was cruel. But he didn't rise to it. He held Nia tighter. He looked Tracy dead in the eye and said, "Pack your things. You have 10 minutes. Then I'm calling the police." Tracy scoffed, her arms still folded, her chin slightly raised. "You're going to ruin my reputation over a few swats? Do you know how many families beg for a nanny like me?" Malcolm stepped forward, his voice no louder than before, but every word sharp as a blade. Then they can have you, because this is the last time you'll ever come near my daughter. For a moment, Tracy looked like she might fight back, but then she saw something in Malcolm's face, something resolute, something dangerous. Not rage, not desperation, just finality. She paused. Her lips parted like she was about to respond, then closed again. She picked up the laundry basket, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. Malcolm didn't move until the sound of her footsteps disappeared down the hallway. He stood there for several seconds, breathing hard, heart pounding, Nia still holding on as if letting go would make him vanish. The ice cream had melted inside the paper bag on the counter. The floor beneath them gleamed where Nia had been forced to scrub. Malcolm swallowed hard. He had built an empire, owned real estate on 3 continents, held majority stakes in 6 companies. But none of that had shielded his child from pain. None of that had protected her from fear, and he had almost missed it. Not because he didn't care, but because he trusted too easily, because he was too busy, because he believed money solved things that only presence could. He kissed the top of her head. Her curls were soft against his lips. "I'm so sorry, baby," he whispered. Nia pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes glassy. "Will she come back?" she asked. Malcolm shook his head slowly. "No, sweetheart, never again." And in that moment, standing in his own kitchen, still wearing his suit from a morning meeting, with his daughter wrapped in his arms and the weight of his failure pressing on his shoulders, Malcolm Hayes realized that everything he had built, every title, every award, every asset, meant nothing if he couldn't keep the one person who needed him most safe, not just protected from the outside world, but protected from what could grow quietly inside his own home. He didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. He would never look away again. Tracy Whitmore was gone in 12 minutes, not 10. Malcolm had stood at the front door, arms crossed, face unreadable, while she marched down the staircase with a wheeled suitcase and her handbag slung tightly across her shoulder. There was no apology, no parting glance, no last-ditch effort to explain herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even ask for understanding. What she did do, as she paused at the threshold, was turn and look him square in the eye and say, "You'll regret this when she turns on you too." But Malcolm didn't flinch. He simply opened the door wider and said nothing. Let the wind carry her bitterness down the street where it belonged. When the latch clicked shut behind her, he didn't celebrate. He didn't even exhale. He turned around slowly, finding Nia standing halfway down the staircase, holding her stuffed lion, the one Celeste had given her on her 3rd birthday. She was watching, wide-eyed, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Malcolm knelt at the base of the stairs and held out his arms. She didn't run. Not at first. But then something softened in her expression, something that had been bracing for rejection, and she stepped into his embrace like someone stepping into a warm coat after a long storm. He carried her to the living room, settled onto the couch, and let her curl up against his chest while the afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The house felt hollow. The silence now wasn't dangerous like it had been earlier. It was necessary. It allowed room for breath, for realization, for mourning what should never have happened. Malcolm sat there for hours, one hand resting on her back, the other stroking her curls slowly, thoughtfully. His phone buzzed with incoming messages from board members and assistants, but he didn't answer. The world could wait. His daughter couldn't. At some point, she drifted off, her small breaths evening out against his collarbone. He carried her upstairs to her room and laid her gently onto the bed, pulling the quilt up to her shoulders. Her face twitched once in sleep, and instinctively, she reached out, her fingers finding his hand. She didn't wake, but she didn't let go. Malcolm sat beside her, back aching, eyes burning, heart pounding with the weight of 1,000 realizations. The bruises on her arms weren't the only marks left behind. Fear had settled somewhere deeper, coiled like a shadow in the corners of her young heart. And the terrifying truth was, he hadn't seen it. Not because he didn't care, but because he had convinced himself that delegation was protection, that hiring the right people was enough, that providing security and structure could substitute for presence and intuition. But sitting there in the soft light of Nia's bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and storybooks he hadn't read to her in weeks, Malcolm knew with absolute clarity that money had blinded him to the things she needed most. His attention, his trust had been too generous, his absence too frequent. And now, a cost had been paid. When Nia finally stirred, eyes fluttering open, the first thing she whispered was, "Is she gone?" He nodded. "She's gone. Nia, she's not coming back." Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders dropped slightly. A tiny exhale left her lips, and she turned toward the window. "Do I still have to mop tomorrow?" The question shattered something inside him. He leaned forward, kissed her forehead, and said, "No, baby. You never should have been doing that in the first place." She didn't respond, but she closed her eyes again, and this time, her hand remained in his without tension. Later that night, after she had fallen into a deeper sleep, Malcolm walked downstairs and stood alone in the center of the kitchen. The mop still lay on the floor where she had dropped it. He picked it up, leaned it against the pantry door, then turned on the lights and saw the little sponge bucket tucked near the sink. There was a folded dish towel inside, neatly placed, too neat. It looked like a ritual, something planned, rehearsed. He gripped the counter, staring down at the stone surface until his vision blurred. Then he moved to the trash, threw away every cleaning supply in reach, every spray bottle and rag and sponge, as if trying to erase not just the act, but the memory itself. He didn't want her to ever feel like her hands existed to scrub floors. She was his daughter, the daughter of Celeste, the woman who once told him during a rainstorm that children don't remember what you bought them nearly as much as they remember how you made them feel. He had forgotten that, and now, it was carved into his memory forever. He walked back upstairs, loosened his tie, changed into a soft sweatshirt, and sat in the armchair beside Nia's bed. She slept soundly. Her face looked calm for the first time in days, maybe weeks. Her tiny hand still rested open beside her on the pillow. As the clock in the hallway chimed 10, Malcolm pulled out his phone, opened his notes app, and typed one sentence. "You don't get to delegate presence." He stared at the words, then added another. "Tomorrow I start over." He didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but he knew it had to begin with accountability, with more than just removing Tracy, with understanding how someone like her made it into their home in the first place. He had checked references, read background reports, asked Simone, and still, he had missed it. Now, he would fix it, for real this time, because fatherhood wasn't a title. It was a posture, a promise, one that he had almost broken, but not anymore. Never again. Malcolm Hayes woke the next morning not to the sound of his alarm or a calendar alert, but to the small voice of his daughter asking if it was okay for her to come downstairs. That was all she said. No good morning, no cheerful greeting, just a quiet request for permission. And that alone told him how much damage had been done under his roof without his knowing. He walked her down himself, made her toast with a dinosaur-shaped cutter he found in the back of the pantry, and poured her milk into a cup with a silly face on it that she hadn't used in months. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't make her talk. He just sat with her, stayed within arm's reach, and made sure she never once looked over her shoulder like she had the day before, while she ate, draped in her soft blue blanket. He placed a call to his attorney. Tracy's contract would be formally terminated, effective immediately. And more than that, he wanted to press charges. Within hours, the police arrived, took his statement, photographed the bruises on Nia's arms with careful permission, and submitted the evidence to the local child endangerment unit. But even after Tracy was booked and processed later that afternoon, something in Malcolm refused to let go of the weight sitting in his chest. Firing her was necessary. Arresting her was right. But none of it felt like closure. He needed to know how someone like that had slipped through every safeguard. She had passed the background checks. The references had sounded clean. Simone had even said she worked for a friend's family once, and they had nothing but praise. But now, Malcolm didn't trust second-hand assurances. He needed more than surface-level vetting. That same evening, after Nia had fallen asleep on the couch mid-cartoon, he opened his laptop and searched for a name he hadn't said aloud in years. Arlen Graves, a former analyst with California's Department of Social Services. Arlen had retired early and now worked privately, specializing in child welfare investigations and complex caregiver histories. Malcolm didn't waste time. He called the number directly, introduced himself briefly, and laid it out plainly. "I want to know everything about the woman who lived in my home. I want the kind of search that doesn't stop at clean resumes or 5-star reviews. I want to know who she really is." Arlen agreed to take the case, and within 2 days, a manila folder thick with documentation arrived by courier at Malcolm's front gate. It was heavier than he expected. When he opened it at the kitchen table, alone under the soft overhead lights, what he found inside made his stomach turn cold. Tracy Whitmore wasn't her real name. Her legal name was Tracy Griggs, changed nearly 4 years earlier following a civil negligence case filed by a family in Boulder, Colorado. According to the records, she had been accused of excessive discipline, verbal degradation, and emotional manipulation. The report included statements from 2 parents and a family therapist, along with notes from an elementary school counselor who had flagged one of the children for withdrawal and anxiety. The case had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence and a lack of sustained follow-up from the school district. Still, the words were there in black and white, the patterns too clear to ignore. Another document revealed she had been involved with a second family in Nevada, where 2 children had been pulled out of school mid-year, allegedly due to family restructuring, though Arlen's team tracked down an old referral that mentioned at-home behavioral trauma under caregiver supervision. It was coded language, the kind used when a district wants to document something without getting entangled in lawsuits. Malcolm read through each page, jaw clenched, hands trembling. She had moved from family to family, city to city, always just clean enough to avoid consequence. No arrest record until now. No public warning signs. Just traces. Quiet trails of harm. Left behind in children who had likely been told not to speak. And he, Malcolm Hayes, a man who prided himself on foresight, on precision, on reading contracts line by line, had let her into his home without ever seeing the danger. He stood up abruptly, pushed the chair back, and paced the kitchen like a man trying to outrun guilt. He picked up the phone again, this time calling Arlen directly. "Why wasn't this caught before? Why didn't any of this show up?" Arlen's voice on the other end was steady, but firm. "Because most people don't look past the first layer." She knew how to game the system. She kept her social media clean, changed addresses just before background checks. Her reference letters were from untraceable numbers or closed agencies. You didn't miss anything obvious. You just didn't dig deep enough. Frankly, most families don't. Malcolm didn't respond for a moment. He stared at the open folder, at the copy of a photograph included in one file, a little boy with dark bruises under his shirt sleeve, a date scribbled in the corner. That boy wasn't his, but he could have been. The pain was identical, the silence just as heavy. Finally, Malcolm spoke. "Well, I'm not most people. Not anymore." The next morning, he met with the district attorney's office in person. He submitted the report from Arlen Graves. They reviewed the material and agreed to reopen the investigation with broader scope, elevating the charges from simple child endangerment to aggravated child abuse, citing a pattern across state lines. Within 72 hours, 3 additional families had been contacted. One mother from Atlanta flew back immediately, clutching a folder of her own, filled with photographs, therapist notes, and tear-stained letters her son had written about his mean babysitter who had pinched his arms and made him sleep on the floor as punishment. Malcolm attended the first hearing alone. He didn't want Naya near a courtroom, but he sat there, jaw set, eyes steady, and watched as Tracy was brought in wearing a beige jumpsuit and no makeup. Her hair was tied back. Her hands were cuffed. There was no warmth left in her eyes, only a flicker of recognition as she spotted him in the gallery. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away, because now he had seen what lived beneath the surface, and he would make sure it never touched another child again. The headlines came quickly, faster than Malcolm expected and more invasive than he cared to admit. A leak from the district attorney's office triggered a rush of press inquiries, and within 48 hours, local news stations ran stories with bold white text over slow zooms of Tracy's mugshot. Trusted nanny exposed with dark past, her previous employers, those who had remained silent out of shame or fatigue, began to speak up, one by one, their voices trembling on daytime news segments and online forums. A mother in Portland shared how her 7-year-old daughter had developed a stutter while under Tracy's care, only for it to disappear once she was removed. A couple from Reno recalled how Tracy insisted on total control, limiting the children's access to their own toys, claiming it taught restraint. The stories weren't identical, but the pattern was unmistakable. Authoritarian control masked as structure, silence enforced through fear. And when confronted, Tracy always turned the blame back on the parents, often citing a lack of discipline or involvement. The public outrage grew rapidly, but Malcolm refused every interview request. He turned down offers from morning shows and podcasts, ignored phone calls from journalists looking for a soundbite. He wasn't interested in attention. He wasn't seeking sympathy or fame. He only wanted 2 things: justice for Nia, and healing for the quiet little girl who still flinched whenever someone raised their voice, even if it was just a character on TV, while the world dissected the story. Malcolm pulled further inward. He canceled 2 major business deals, declined speaking engagements, and submitted a formal leave of absence to the board of Hayes Capital Group. He didn't explain himself. He didn't owe them a reason. His focus was here, at home, where his daughter had been hurt under his watch, and where she needed to see with her own eyes what protection looked like. Each morning began the same way. He would cook breakfast, sometimes pancakes shaped like animals, other times just scrambled eggs and toast cut diagonally, and sit across from her at the table while she slowly stirred her cereal, saying little but always watching him. He noticed how she checked the corners of each room before entering, how her shoulders tensed when she heard footsteps from behind, how she kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, even when she wasn't being asked to do anything. He didn't push, he didn't pry, but he paid attention. And when she asked, one rainy afternoon as they sat by the window, "Is she still in jail?" he answered plainly. "Yes, baby. She is." She nodded, then asked, "Will she come back when they let her go?" Malcolm set down his coffee mug, crouched beside her, and placed his hand over hers. No, he said firmly, because I will never let anyone hurt you again. Not ever. She studied his face carefully, as if measuring his words, testing them for weight and truth. Then, for the first time in days, she leaned into his chest and whispered, "Okay." That was enough. He didn't need more than that. Not yet. But it was a start. Her therapist, Dr. Carla Moreno, a gentle woman with years of trauma-informed practice, began working with Nia twice a week through play therapy and art sessions. Malcolm sat in on the first 3, not in the room but just outside the door, listening through a discreet audio monitor with Dr. Moreno's permission. He heard the moments of silence stretch out, then shorten, then fill with the soft voice of a child trying to name her fears without reliving them. He wept quietly after the first session, not because of what she said, but because of how hard she worked to say it. There was no guidebook for this, no spreadsheet to follow, only presence, only time. He kept a journal at night now, not for business plans or market notes, but for memories, his own and Nia's. And he wrote down the first time she laughed again, just a small chuckle at a cartoon dog slipping on banana peels. He documented when she asked to go outside without holding his hand, and when she colored a picture of their house with the sun finally back in the corner. These moments weren't loud or grand. They didn't make headlines, but they mattered. They mattered more than profit margins or shareholder votes or keynote speeches. In court, Tracy's defense tried to shift the narrative, arguing that her disciplinary methods had been misinterpreted and that her firm hand had always been with the child's best interest in mind. But the evidence spoke louder. The photos, the therapist notes, the testimonies from other families, and most of all, Nia's quiet, unwavering statement recorded in a closed session with the court-appointed advocate. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply said, "She told me I had to work or I'd be sent away like Mommy." That one sentence carried more weight than all the legal filings combined. When the prosecutor played the audio during the pre-trial hearing, the courtroom went completely still. Tracy didn't look up. She just sat there, hands clasped, her once flawless composure finally unraveling. Malcolm never took his eyes off her, not out of vengeance, not out of hate, but out of duty. He wanted her to know that he wasn't the man she thought he was, the absentee, the soft mark. He was Nia's father, and he had shown up, finally. The judge denied bail, citing potential risk and pattern of prior allegations. Tracy was remanded until sentencing. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited for a statement, but Malcolm simply held up his hand, palm forward, and kept walking. He wasn't there to explain the pain. He was there to make sure it stopped with her, because this wasn't just about one nanny or one mistake. It was about how easily harm can hide in plain sight, about how a resume can't tell you who someone really is, and about how dangerous it is to trust systems more than your own instincts. Malcolm had made that mistake once, but not anymore. Not ever again. Healing didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, like fog lifting from the bay at sunrise, soft and uneven, revealing shapes beneath that had been hidden in shadow far too long. Malcolm Hayes learned quickly that there were no shortcuts in recovery, no amount of money or influence that could repair trust overnight, no lawyer or therapist who could reverse time. What his daughter needed wasn't a solution. She needed consistency, reassurance, safety that didn't just come from locked doors or security systems, but from knowing that her father saw her, heard her, and wasn't going anywhere. So he started each day the same way. He was the one to wake her, gently knocking on the door and waiting for her voice before entering. He laid out her favorite soft pink sweatshirt on the edge of her bed and placed her little lion stuffed animal, the one Celeste had given her before she passed, right by her pillow where she could reach for it first thing. He made her breakfast with his own hands, sometimes oatmeal with bananas, sometimes French toast cut into triangles, and always with the quiet patience of a man learning to earn back his place, not with grand gestures, but with everyday presence. Nia didn't speak much during those first mornings. She ate in silence, wrapped in her blanket, eyes often downcast. But she never refused his company. She never asked him to leave, and that alone was progress. In the afternoons, she drew pictures on the kitchen island while he read nearby, not watching her like an audience but simply existing next to her, shoulder to shoulder in shared space. She mostly used crayons, blue and green for skies, red for dresses, black for outlines. He didn't comment unless she offered, but he noticed the little shifts. The first week, her drawings were mostly of houses without windows. The second week, the windows appeared, though they had no curtains. By the third week, one of her drawings had a small figure with curly hair sitting on a park bench beside a taller one with a blue shirt. She slid it across the counter without looking up and said, "That's me and you." He swallowed hard and didn't speak for a long moment, then finally said, "I love it. Nia, thank you for showing me." She nodded and picked up another crayon. That evening, when she was getting ready for bed, she paused at the bathroom mirror and asked him quietly, "Will she come back when the police let her go?" He knelt beside her, looked her in the eye, and replied, "No, sweetheart, she won't. Because I won't let anyone like that near you again. Ever." She stared at his face as if testing the words for truth, then reached out and touched his chin with her fingers, small and soft. "You were gone a lot." Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was a statement. Honest. Simple. But it struck deeper than any courtroom testimony ever could. He nodded, his voice thick. "I know. And I was wrong. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again. Not unless you're coming with me." She didn't say anything. She just leaned into his chest and let him hold her while the night settled in around them. Malcolm began journaling again. This time not in spreadsheets or business strategy briefs, but in a weathered leather notebook he found buried in a desk drawer. He wrote down what she said, how she looked when she said it, and the moments in between, when she smiled at a silly joke, when she asked for extra syrup, when she left the bathroom light on just in case. These weren't details for memory's sake. They were his reminders, proof that healing wasn't theoretical. It was measurable, real. The house itself began to shift too. Rooms that once felt like galleries began to breathe again. He removed the glass sculptures from the hallway shelves and replaced them with framed pictures of Nia and Celeste, their smiles radiant from family trips and birthdays long past. He brought the family dog home from the trainers for good. A gentle golden retriever named Jasper who followed Nia like a shadow and curled up by her feet at night. The kitchen, once a place of fear and punishment, became a haven for late-night banana bread and Saturday morning pancake messes. The laundry room, where Tracy had once barked commands, was now where Malcolm taught Nia how to fold towels. Slowly, carefully, with no rush and lots of laughter. He allowed messes. He allowed mistakes. And most importantly, he allowed questions. Because now, everything was on the table. Nothing would be hidden again. In therapy, Nia began using storybooks to explain her emotions. One afternoon, she brought Malcolm a book about a turtle who retreated into his shell every time someone raised their voice. "This is me," she said simply. He nodded. "I understand." Then she opened another about a lion cub learning to roar again. "This is who I want to be." He swallowed hard. "And I'll be here to help you get there." The day before the sentencing hearing, Malcolm found her sitting in the backyard with a sketchbook, quietly drawing under the shade of the maple tree. She was wearing the yellow sundress Celeste had sewn for her, the one with tiny daisies stitched into the hem. Her hair was pulled into a soft puff, her skin glowing in the warm California light. She looked peaceful, strong, like someone beginning to believe in safe places again. He watched her from the porch, hands resting on his knees, and thought to himself that for all the billions he'd moved in markets, for all the rooms he had spoken in, this quiet act of sitting nearby, of being available, of staying, was the most valuable thing he had ever done. And as Naya looked up and met his gaze, her eyes calm and unafraid, he finally understood what Celeste had meant when she used to say, "Presence is not about being in the room, it's about being in the moment." He rose slowly and walked over, sat beside her on the grass, and asked, "What are you drawing?" She showed him the picture. It was a treehouse, sturdy and wide, with a ladder going up the middle and a hammock hanging underneath. In the window was a girl with curly hair. In the hammock was a man holding a book. "Is that us?" he asked. She nodded. "That's our safe place now." And for the first time since the day he walked into that kitchen and saw the bruises, Malcolm Hayes smiled with something more than relief. He smiled with hope. The courthouse was quieter than Malcolm expected on the day of sentencing. A pale morning sun filtered through the large windows of the San Francisco Superior Court, casting a soft, almost reverent glow across the polished floors. Malcolm arrived early, wearing a navy suit that fit him like armor, crisp white shirt, no tie, just a simple lapel pin that had belonged to Celeste, a silver lion, a quiet symbol of strength. Nia walked beside him, her hand tucked confidently into his. She wore a light blue dress with soft sleeves and a braided headband she had picked out herself. Her favorite stuffed lion was tucked in her backpack, not clutched tightly like before, but carried like something she had chosen to bring, not something she needed to survive. She didn't speak much on the way in. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. They sat together in the front row, facing the woman who had once made their home feel like a place of dread. Tracy Griggs, now stripped of her assumed name and courtroom polish, stood at the defendant's bench in a beige prison-issued jumpsuit, hands folded at her waist, mouth tight, eyes flat. There was no confidence left in her stance, no arrogance, no sense of control. Her attorney whispered something to her, but she barely responded. Her reputation was gone, her license revoked, her references withdrawn, and every lie she had hidden behind had finally collapsed under the weight of truth, one by one. The statements were read aloud, from the families in Colorado and Nevada, from the mother who had flown in from Atlanta and described the welts on her son's back with quiet, furious clarity. The judge listened carefully, making occasional notes, but his expression remained unreadable. Then came the victim impact statement. Malcolm stood and walked to the podium. He glanced once at Tracy, then looked straight ahead. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but unwavering. "My daughter was hurt in a place that should have been her safest sanctuary. Our home. She was manipulated, silenced, and physically harmed by someone we trusted. And while no sentence can undo what's been done, I stand here not just for her, but for every child who was told to be quiet, to be good, to stay small. I stand for the ones who didn't know how to speak up. And I ask this court to protect them, to make it clear that this kind of violation does not get overlooked, or excused, or quietly forgotten." He paused, let the silence settle, then said, "Because silence is what allowed this to go on for years, and we are done being silent," when he returned to his seat. Nia looked up at him and gave a small nod. It was all the affirmation he needed. The judge delivered the sentence with precision and finality. 3 years in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and mandatory therapy focused on child behavioral ethics. No parole eligibility for the first 20 months. The courtroom was still. Tracy said nothing. Not a word. Not to the judge, not to the families, not to Malcolm. And it didn't matter, because her power had already been broken. She was escorted out by 2 officers, her gaze never lifting from the floor. As the door clicked shut behind her, Malcolm exhaled slowly and felt something lift. Not vengeance, not satisfaction, but relief. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from knowing you finally did the right thing when it counted. That weekend, Malcolm took Nia to Marina Green, the park her mother used to bring her on sunny mornings. The same place where Malcolm and Celeste had once sat under a tree, dreaming aloud about who their daughter might become. The sky was blue, dotted with white sails on the bay, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and ocean salt. Nia wore a soft yellow sundress, and her curls bounced as she ran across the open lawn, laughing with a clarity that had been absent for far too long. She didn't glance behind her to see if someone was watching. She didn't flinch when a dog barked nearby. She just ran. Malcolm sat on a wooden bench, hands resting loosely between his knees, eyes never leaving her. Not for a second, because now he understood that watching was not about control. It was about presence, protection, a promise made quietly but held fiercely. Nia eventually ran back to him, breathless and smiling, and climbed into his lap like she used to. Her head settled against his chest, and for a while, they just sat there. No rush, no phone calls, no meetings, just sun and wind and the steady rhythm of trust being rebuilt. Then she whispered, "You're not going to leave again, right?" Malcolm kissed the top of her head and replied, "Never again." He paused, then added, "I thought I was giving you everything. The house, the school, the trips. But I forgot what the world feels like when you don't feel safe in it." She nodded gently, her voice muffled against his chest. "It feels really small." He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "And now?" She looked up, eyes wide, steady. "It feels big again." In that moment, Malcolm Hayes didn't feel like a millionaire, or a CEO, or a man who had once been too distracted to notice the danger growing under his own roof. He felt like a father, a real one. Not a title, not a provider, but a protector, present and unshakable. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the park, he held his daughter close, grateful not for what he had, but for what he still had the chance to be. If this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more. Let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Thank you. And we'll see you in the next story.